All right, guys, so we're going to look now at concentric contractions. So we've talked about eccentrics, we've talked about isometrics. Being able to understand the eccentric contractions, when we look at eccentric contractions, that's a muscle creating tension to move a joint or to shorten in length and to create force. Now, when we talked about eccentrics, eccentrics produce more force than concentric contractions. Part of that is due to the fact that when we're already at length, it's harder to get that movement going, and actin and myosin in that muscle cell have to pull a little bit harder joint. Now, when we look at this, and the other reason is also just biological mechanism in terms of producing force. It's a biological safety switch, because you can't have a car that has a stronger gas pedal than it has brakes, right? Nobody needs a Ferrari with the brakes of a Prius. Especially a Toyota, if we really want to go back into those days. But anyway, long story. When we look at then concentric contractions, being able to then understand how do we train this. Now, we've talked about tempos, and then we've talked about fast eccentrics, we've talked about slow eccentrics, we've talked about overcoming isometrics and yielding isometrics. Really, then we look at then creating two different concentric contractions. Now, normally, like if I were to just do a squat right here, I move, right, my quads per se create a concentric contraction to extend my knee. My hamstrings can create a concentric contraction to extend my hip. Now, when we look at those motions, then we can start to say, what is our end goal and how do we train that? So let's just say I want to increase muscle size. Well, I might put myself under a tempo, right? Well, I might come down and I'm 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'm creating a longer set of tension or more time under tension, will result in a little bit more muscle tone or muscle size, depending on what terminology you want to use. Then when we look at then trying to create explosive contractions, then we look at being able to then control and explode out of a position, whether that's a push-up, whether that's a bench press, whether that is a squat, it doesn't matter. We're trying to increase the rate of contraction that we can get that muscle fiber and muscle cell to act under. So, the different ways we can apply this, and this is where it really all ties together. Triphasic training. We've talked about eccentric, isometric, and concentric. Well, we can take those, and when we talked about plyometrics in a previous video, we talked about the stretch shortening cycle. So stretch shortening cycle is basically the muscle's ability to go from eccentric, isometric to concentric in a really quick time frame. So if I do a jump here and do a little pogo like that, my muscles and my calf just move from eccentric, isometric, concentric in the blink of an eye. Now, being able to understand that those muscle actions, when they happen, we can train within those. And so Cal Dietz, the strength coach out of Minnesota, developed triphasic training. It's one of the more popular systems that are out there for developing power and speed and explosiveness, where we go through and break down each phase of those contractions into subsequent blocks. Now, the reason for this, and the case as to why this happens, is we can create biological adaptations for building tendon health, right? We talked about tendon health and being pliable. Creating those eccentric contractions allows us to create tendons that are a little bit stiffer. Being able to then work through some of those motions, right? We can align tendon fibers even to then be more aligned, so their line of pull is a little bit better. Being able to understand that when we talk about setting in stone a training program, if we work through all three of these different contractions, we're going to create stronger tendons, we're going to create stronger muscles, and then we're also going to work in a way that's a little bit healthier for us, and then we're going to be able to get better performance results out of it. So being able to understand, that's why we go over those three contractions, because I might say, hey, I want to increase my explosiveness, or I want my knees to feel better. I've got tendonitis in my knees, I want my knees to feel better. You can go through those different sets of muscle contractions. It's going to help work the tendons a little bit differently to be able to work and hold the potential energy, go through those different muscle contractions, and then you're going to get a better outcome long term. So that's concentric muscle actions. It's a little bit shorter, but then how to apply all three of those different muscle contractions into a training program, then to be able to make more sense out of it and be able to have a little bit of variety, because then you get to change up training, and then to be able to get better health and performance outcomes. So there's your 3 muscle contractions. There's a brief way of how to apply it, and then just to be able to understand the baseline level, what's going on in the body, to then take ownership of your own health, your fitness, and your performance.